For 12 years, she lived in fear of her husband's locked cabin, the one place he told her never to enter. Then he died, 3 months later, 6 months pregnant and desperate for answers. She finally opened her husband's locked cabin, and what she found changed everything she thought she knew about his death. What she found wasn't just a secret. It was the truth about why he risked everything, and how far a father will go to save his unborn child. Before we begin, if you believe love is stronger than fear, subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. On the far edge of Black Hollow Ridge, where the pine trees grow so tall they swallow the sky, there stood a narrow wooden cabin no one ever spoke about. Clara Whitmore used to joke that it looked like something out of an old ghost story, small, weather-beaten, always locked. But her husband, Daniel Whitmore, never laughed at those jokes. Not once in 12 years of marriage. Daniel was a quiet man, 42, a high school math teacher with steady hands and careful words. The kind of man who fixed broken fences before sunrise and kissed his wife's forehead every single night without fail. He had only ever asked one thing of Clara. "Promise me you'll never go inside the cabin," he'd said the day they bought the land in the Smoky Mountains. His voice had been calm, but firm in a way that made her stop asking questions. Family history, he told her. Private things. She had trusted him, until the morning she found him collapsed on the kitchen floor, his coffee still warm beside him. Now, 3 months later, 6 months pregnant and sleeping with the lights on every night. Clara stood at the edge of the woods, holding a brass key she was never meant to find. And for the first time in her life, she was afraid of what love might have been hiding. If you had asked Clara Whitmore a year ago whether she believed her husband kept secrets, she would have smiled the soft kind of smile that comes from certainty and said no. Daniel wasn't dramatic. He wasn't mysterious. He graded papers at the dining table and complained about property taxes. He hummed old country songs off-key when he thought no one was listening. But grief has a way of rearranging memories. 3 weeks after the funeral, Clara finally gathered the strength to clean out Daniel's study. The room still smelled like him, cedarwood aftershave, and the faint metallic scent of pencil shavings. His desk was just as he'd left it, neat, precise, every bill clipped together, every pen aligned. That was Daniel. Predictable, until it wasn't. She found the journal in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old tax returns. Leather-bound, worn at the edges like it had been opened 100 times. Her hands trembled before she even touched it. At first, the entries looked harmless sketches of the surrounding hills, notes about soil composition, weather patterns. He'd always loved nature, said numbers made more sense when you saw them living and breathing in the real world. But as she kept reading, the tone shifted. The dates grew closer together. The handwriting tighter. March 3rd, fluctuations stronger tonight. Not natural, not random. March 18th, the cabin sits directly over the convergence point. I was right. Convergence. Clara frowned at the word. April 2nd. If the data holds, this isn't just geological, it's temporal. She whispered the word out loud. Temporal. Time. Her breath caught. By April, the entries became urgent. I've run the calculations 3 times. The anomaly repeats every 317 hours. The cabin amplifies it. May 12th, I heard something tonight. June 1st, I saw something. Her chest tightened. July 7th, 3 days before he died. If I'm right about what's coming, I may not have a choice. Clara and the baby must be protected. If anything happens to me, I've left the key where she'll find it when she's ready. The room felt suddenly smaller. Clara pressed a hand against her swollen belly, as if the child inside her might somehow anchor her to something solid and real. When she's ready? Ready for what? Her mind replayed the morning Daniel collapsed. The way he had looked at her over breakfast, distracted, almost distant. The way he had kissed her longer than usual before stepping into the kitchen. She had thought it was love. Now she wondered if it had been goodbye. The baby shifted sharply inside her, and she gasped, steadying herself against the desk. She kept reading. June 28th. I've confirmed it. There are parallel signatures, identical structures slightly out of phase. This isn't just space bending. It's overlapping. A thin place. Thin place. Clara's eyes burned. He had been afraid. Daniel, who never feared storms, who once chased a black bear off their property with nothing but a shovel and stubbornness, had written the word danger 3 times on one page. Danger to Clara. Danger to the child. Her vision blurred. For 12 years she had respected that cabin. She'd walked past it on hikes and turned her head out of courtesy. She'd defended Daniel when her sister teased him about having a man cave in the woods. She had believed love meant trusting without needing proof. Now she wasn't sure if love had meant being protected or being kept in the dark. That night, she didn't sleep. The house creaked around her like it was remembering something she couldn't. At 2:17, she sat up in bed, heart racing for no reason she could name. The clock's red digits glowed in the darkness. 17:17. She grabbed the journal from her nightstand and flipped back through the entries. 317 hours. Her pulse pounded in her ears. And then she remembered something. The spare keys. Daniel had kept them in a small cedar box on the top shelf of the hallway closet. She'd never paid much attention to them before. House key. Shed key. Old truck key. Her bare feet were silent against the hardwood as she crossed the hall. The house felt colder than usual. She reached up on tiptoe, her fingers brushing the box. It was heavier than she expected. When she opened it, the familiar keys clinked together softly. And beneath them, a small brass key, old, ornate, nothing like the others. Her breath left her in a slow, trembling exhale. She knew. She didn't need confirmation. She didn't need logic. This was the key. The one he'd left where she'd find it when she was ready. She closed her fist around it, and for a moment, she simply stood there. Anger flickered through her grief. Why didn't you tell me, Daniel? Why did you carry this alone? But beneath the anger was something deeper. Fear! Because whatever Daniel had discovered had terrified him enough to risk everything. And now she was standing at the edge of it. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, brushing against the windows like a whisper. The cabin waited in the woods. Locked. Silent. And suddenly, Clara realized something that made her knees weaken. She wasn't afraid of what she might find inside. She was afraid of what it might mean if Daniel had been telling the truth. The walk to the cabin felt longer than it ever had before. Clara had passed that narrow dirt path 100 times in 12 years, but now every step seemed to echo. Pine needles muffled her footsteps, and the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows between the trees. She kept one hand on her belly the whole way. Your daddy better have a good explanation, she whispered softly. The cabin appeared through the trees like it had been waiting for her. Smaller than she remembered. Weathered. Quiet. Watching. Her pulse drummed in her ears as she stepped onto the sagging porch. The boards creaked beneath her weight. For a moment, she almost turned back. If she walked away now, Daniel would still be the man she remembered. Simple, safe, familiar. But the journal in her coat pocket felt heavier than the child she carried. Clara slid the brass key into the lock. It turned too easily. The door opened with a slow groan, releasing a breath of cold, metallic air, sharp and electric, like the air before lightning strikes. She stepped inside, and her world tilted. This was not a storage cabin. Maps covered the walls, dozens of them. Some yellowed with age, others freshly printed. each one marked with circles and symbols she didn't recognize. The center of every map was the same point. The cabin. A large wooden table stood in the middle of the room, cluttered with notebooks, measuring instruments, wires, and something that looked like a modified radio system. Screens blinked faint green lights, as if they had never been turned off. Her husband, her quiet, math-teaching husband, had built a laboratory in the woods. Her knees nearly gave out. "Daniel, what were you doing?" She moved slowly, touching nothing at first, afraid it might all vanish if she did. Charts labeled with timestamps, readings that repeated every 317 hours. She found photographs pinned in careful rows. The same clearing, the same stone arch formation deeper in the forest. But in each photo, something was different. A tree slightly bent in one image and straight in another. A fallen log present, then missing. Cloud formations identical, except for one detail out of place. They weren't photographs of different days. They were photographs of different versions of the same moment. Her breath hitched. A low hum pulsed from the far corner of the room. She turned. There, sitting atop a carved wooden box, was a crystal. It was no bigger than a robin's egg. Clear at first glance, but when she moved closer, colors rippled inside it. Blue, violet, a faint red pulse at its core. It was glowing. Softly. Her heart pounded. She remembered the journal. Thin places. Overlapping structures slightly out of phase. She reached toward it before she could stop herself. The moment her fingers brushed the surface, the cabin erupted in light. The crystal flared bright blue, flooding the room with an unnatural glow. The hum deepened into a vibration she felt in her bones. Clara gasped, stumbling back. And then she heard it. Clara. Her name! Clear. Familiar. Impossible. She froze. The air around her felt charged, like static racing across her skin. Clara, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it back in time. Tears flooded her eyes instantly. Daniel's voice. Not a memory. Not imagination. It echoed from the crystal itself. She dropped to her knees in front of the table. Daniel. Her voice cracked. Daniel. What is this? The crystal pulsed again, and his voice continued distorted slightly, like a weak radio signal fighting interference. The convergence point beneath the cabin, it's real, I confirmed it. It connects us to adjacent realities, versions of our world, nearly identical. Clara shook her head, sobbing quietly. No, this isn't real. It started as research. Daniel's voice went on. Just anomalies. But then I intercepted data medical records from a reality 6 months ahead of ours. Her breath caught painfully in her chest. The baby, Clara. The world narrowed to a single point. In that reality, our son was born with a congenital cardiac defect. Undetectable here. Fatal within months. Her hand flew to her stomach. The baby kicked. Alive. Warm. Safe. For weeks I ran the numbers. Daniel continued. Cross-referenced timelines, and I realized something. If I could cross over, I could bring back their treatment protocol. Tears streamed down her face. You crossed, she whispered. I had to. His voice broke slightly. I couldn't let you bury our child the way they did. The crystal flickered red. The hum in the room grew louder. But something went wrong. The convergence destabilized. There was interference. Clara, if I didn't return, if you're alone, it means I'm still there. Her breathing turned shallow. Still there. Alive. Somewhere. In the hidden compartment beneath the observer table. Daniel said urgently. There's a drive. The treatment data is on it, if I failed. You must use it. Protect him. Protect our son. The lights flickered violently. A sharp pain shot through her fingertips as the crystal overheated. And Clara. His voice softened, almost breaking. If I get another chance, I'm coming home. The crystal exploded with blinding light. Clara screamed and shielded her face as a shockwave knocked her backward against the wall. Then silence. The cabin fell still. The glow faded. The crystal sat dormant in its box. The only sound was her ragged breathing. She lay on the floor for several long seconds, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding like it might tear itself free. Her husband hadn't died of a random heart attack. He had tried to cross into another reality, to save their child, and maybe, just maybe, he wasn't dead at all. Clara slowly pushed herself upright. Her fear was gone now. In its place burned something stronger. If there was even the smallest chance Daniel was still out there, she would not sit in this house and grieve. She would bring him home. Clara did not remember the walk back to the house. Later, she would recall fragments, the wind pushing through the trees, the ache in her lower back, the weight of the small flash drive now tucked into her coat pocket. But mostly, she remembered the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that feels like the world is holding its breath. That night, she didn't cry. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, she did not sit on the kitchen floor replaying the moment she found him. She did not press her face into his old flannel shirt. Instead, she sat at his desk. The hidden compartment beneath the metal observer stand had been exactly where he said it would be. Her hands had shaken when she found it a small silver drive wrapped in electrical tape. Daniel had never lied to her. Not really. He had just carried something too heavy to share. Clara plugged the drive into his laptop. It took 3 tries before she found the right password. 317 Thomas. She froze when the folder opened. Thomas. They had never officially chosen a name. But Daniel had. Video files, medical charts, genetic markers she didn't understand. And then one file labeled simply, Final Log, July 7th, if I don't return. Her hands trembled as she pressed play. Daniel appeared on the screen, sitting in the cabin. He looked exhausted, thinner than she remembered. There were shadows beneath his eyes. She hadn't noticed that last week. I don't have much time, he began quietly. The window opens at 2A. Mum, if calculations are correct, I'll cross into variant B7 and retrieve the screening protocol. I'll be back within 48 hours. He paused. His composure cracked just slightly. If something interferes, if you're watching this, Clara, I need you to know I would never choose discovery over you. I would never choose science over our son. Her breath broke. I saw him, Daniel whispered. In B7. I saw our boy in that reality. We didn't catch it in time there. We buried him at 3 months old. Clara pressed a trembling hand over her mouth. I cannot live in a world knowing there is a version of us that found a way to save him, and not try. The video flickered. Someone else is monitoring the convergence. I don't know who yet. If I don't return, it may not be because I failed. It may be because I was stopped. The screen went dark. Clara sat in the dim light of the office, her mind unraveling. Stopped? By who? A soft knock at the front door made her jump. Her heart slammed into her ribs. No one visited anymore. Not since the funeral. She moved slowly toward the door, every nerve awake. A man stood on the porch. Mid-40s, windbreaker, wire-rim glasses, the kind of face you'd forget in a grocery store. But his eyes were sharp. You're Clara Whitmore, he said gently. Not a question. She did not open the door fully. Yes. My name is Andrew Mercer. I worked with Daniel. Her breath stalled. Daniel had never mentioned an Andrew. I think we need to talk, he said quietly. About the cabin. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. Daniel's dead. Andrew's expression shifted. Is he? The words hit her like ice water. You were at the hospital, he asked carefully. "I found him," she said, voice shaking. "He collapsed. Cardiac arrest." Andrew studied her. "Did the doctors mention cellular irregularities?" Her stomach dropped. "They said something about tissue breakdown. They thought it was delayed response time." Andrew exhaled slowly. "That wasn't a heart attack." The world tilted. Clara stepped back, letting him inside. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where Daniel had drunk coffee that final morning. "Daniel and I discovered the convergence 8 years ago." Andrew began. "We were mapping electromagnetic anomalies in this region. What we found wasn't geological. Temporal," Clara whispered. Andrew's eyes flicked up. "He told you." She nodded once. Andrew leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Crossing between realities isn't clean. If two identical individuals attempt to cross simultaneously, it can create a mirror displacement." Her blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" "It means when Daniel crossed into B7, another Daniel may have crossed here at the exact same moment." She stared at him. "The man who died in your kitchen," Andrew said carefully, "may not have been your Daniel." Silence fell so hard it felt physical. "That's insane," she whispered. Andrew shook his head. "The tissue breakdown. That's molecular destabilization. It happens when a body isn't fully synchronized with the quantum signature of the reality it enters." Her hands went numb. "You're telling me I buried someone else's husband?" Andrew swallowed. "I'm telling you your Daniel may still be alive." The air left her lungs. Alive. Not gone. Not ashes scattered across the Tennessee River. Alive. Her grief twisted into something electric. "Why are you telling me this now?" she demanded. Andrew hesitated. "Because the convergence is building again. We've detected energy spikes for weeks. The next peak is tomorrow, 3:17 p.m. Her chest tightened. "He'll try to come back," she whispered. Andrew nodded. "If he can—" "And if he can't?" Andrew's jaw clenched. "Then whoever's been monitoring the site will intercept him." Monitoring. There are federal teams tracking anomalous energy signatures. They don't understand the science, but they know it's valuable. If they capture Daniel, he won't come home. Clara's fear burned away, replaced by clarity. For months she had lived in dread of the dark, of loneliness, of raising a child alone. Now the fear had shape. Now it had a fight. She stood slowly. "Take me to the stone arch." Andrew blinked. "You're 6 months pregnant. And I am done sitting still." Her voice did not shake this time. "If my husband crossed the universe for our son," she said quietly, "then I can walk into the woods for him." Outside, the wind picked up, and somewhere deep in the forest, the air began to hum again. The morning of October 15th arrived too quietly. No bird song, no wind through the trees. Even the mountains seemed to be waiting. Clara hadn't slept. She sat at the kitchen table with Daniel's wedding ring in her palm, the one that had fallen through the convergence the night the crystal flared. She wore it now on a thin chain around her neck, resting just above the steady curve of her belly. Andrew stood by the window, scanning the tree line with binoculars. "They've been out there since dawn," he said quietly. "2 vehicles. Unmarked, parked off the forestry road." Clara felt the baby shift beneath her hand. "He's coming back today," she whispered. Not to Andrew. Not even to herself. To Daniel. Andrew turned toward her. "The peak hits at 3:17 Mom, but the field will destabilize 15 minutes before. That's our window. And the government team, they'll detect the surge. When they do, they'll move." Clara stood slowly, steadying herself. "Then we move first." They reached the stone arch just after 2. Mist hung low across the clearing, curling around the granite slabs like breath. The arch looked ancient, older than the forest itself. 2 massive stones leaning against each other in impossible balance. It looked ordinary. That was the cruelest part. Andrew unpacked equipment, quickly sensors, a modified field detector, and the carved wooden box containing the crystal Clara stepped closer to the arch. The air felt different here. Thicker, charged, like standing near a power line humming just beyond hearing. She pressed both hands against her lower back and inhaled slowly. "Talk to me," she whispered to the quiet space beyond the stone. Andrew checked his watch. Energy levels rising. We're at 42%. Clara felt it too, a subtle vibration in her teeth, in her bones. At 240, the air began to shimmer inside the arch, like heat rising from asphalt. Clara gasped softly. Through the distortion, she saw trees. But not their trees. The spacing was wrong. The light too sharp. Andrew swallowed. That's B7. Her heart slammed into her ribs. He's there. At 255, the hum grew louder. The crystal inside the wooden box began to glow faint blue. Andrew positioned it precisely beneath the arch. This acts as a beacon. He explained, it broadcasts our quantum signature. If Daniel's in position, he'll lock onto it. Clara stepped forward, despite the tingling in her skin. "I'm here," she whispered. At 3:05, the distortion deepened. The forest beyond the arch solidified. Not just flickers, now a full view. And then, a figure, far back in the clearing on the other side, walking. Her breath caught painfully in her throat. "Daniel!" The figure moved closer. Tall, thin, moving with urgency. The same slight tilt of his shoulders she'd watched for 12 years. Andrew's detector began shrieking. Energy spike 85%, something's wrong. The shimmer rippled violently. The ground trembled. Through the arch, Daniel stumbled, bracing himself as if pushing against hurricane-force wind. He saw her. She knew he did. His hand lifted. Clara took a step forward. "Don't!" Andrew shouted. But she couldn't stop. "Not now." "Daniel," she cried. The air between them crackled. A metallic object shot through the distortion and landed at her feet. She looked down. Her breath left her. It was the ultrasound photo she had tucked into Daniel's jacket pocket the night before he died. The same crease in the corner? The same smudge of ink? He had carried it across realities. Tears blurred her vision. Andrew's voice sounded distant. "Peak in 30 seconds. The energy field pulsed violently. Daniel reached the threshold. His body began to blur at the edges, half here, half somewhere else. Clara felt something shift inside her, not fear. Certainty. She stepped to the very edge of the arch. "Come home," she whispered. Daniel's mouth moved. She couldn't hear him, but she saw the words. "I'm trying." Suddenly, the forest behind them erupted with noise. Engines. Doors slamming. Men shouting. "They're here," Andrew barked. 3 black SUVs burst through the tree line, tactical agents pouring out with equipment aimed at the arch. The energy detector howled. The crystal flared blinding blue. The field destabilized. Daniel screamed, not in pain, but in effort, straining forward as the barrier snapped and surged like a living thing. One of the agents raised a device toward the arch. Disruption unit charging. No, Andrew lunged toward the equipment, but it was too late. A pulse of energy fired into the convergence. The arch roared. The distortion collapsed inward violently. Clara felt herself lifted off her feet. The world went white, for one impossible heartbeat. She felt Daniel's hand in hers. Warm. Solid. Real. Then the shockwave threw her backward into the grass. Silence crashed down over the clearing. The SUV's engines died. The equipment sparked and went dark. Smoke curled from the stone arch. Clara struggled to sit up, ears ringing. The agents were scrambling, shouting into dead radios. Andrew crawled toward her. "Clara, are you hurt?" She ignored him. Her eyes locked on the base of the arch. A man lay crumpled in the grass, not shimmering, not fading. Solid. Her heart stopped. Daniel. The figure moved. A cough. A slow, shaky breath. And then he rolled onto his back and opened his eyes. For a moment, Clara couldn't move. The world had narrowed to a single point beneath the stone arch. Daniel lay there on his back, chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. His clothes were unfamiliar, similar to what he'd worn that morning in July, but cut differently, stitched differently. His face was thinner, older somehow. But it was him. She would have known him in a crowd of 1,000,000 men. "Daniel," she breathed. Andrew was shouting something about radiation levels dropping, about the field collapsing safely, but Clara didn't hear him. She crawled the last few feet across the grass and reached for her husband. Her hand hovered just above his chest. Afraid he might flicker and disappear again? Afraid he might not be real. Daniel's eyes focused slowly. When they found her, something inside him broke open. "Clara," he whispered. It wasn't a question. It was relief. She pressed her palm against his cheek. Warm. Solid. Alive. A sob tore from her throat, not delicate, not controlled, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and ancient. "You came back?" she cried. "I told you I would," he said weakly. Behind them, the agents were regrouping, trying to power their equipment back on. Andrew crouched low. "We have to move. Now!" Daniel tried to sit up but winced sharply. "Molecular recalibration," he muttered through clenched teeth. "My body's adjusting." Clara slid one arm around him. "Then lean on me." He looked down at her belly, round and unmistakable beneath her coat. "The baby. Still kicking," she whispered. "Still ours." His eyes filled. For a man who had crossed realities without hesitation, it was that the sight of his unborn son safe that undid him. They moved quickly towards the tree line as Andrew created a distraction, knocking over a portable generator near the agent's command station. A brief explosion of sparks and smoke gave them the seconds they needed. Clara didn't remember how she found the strength to half-carry her husband through the forest. Grief had made her fragile, but love made her immovable. They didn't stop walking until night fell. By then, Daniel's breathing had steadied. They reached a small, abandoned ranger station Andrew had prepared as a fallback location. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old wood. Clara helped Daniel sit on a worn bench. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other, memorizing. "You're thinner," she said softly. He gave a tired smile. "Time runs differently there." She swallowed. "Tell me." Daniel nodded slowly. "In B7, we didn't catch the defect in time. Our son was born with it. By the time they understood what was wrong, it was too late." His voice cracked. "I held him. Clara, I held him as he slipped away." Her knees nearly buckled. "But you're not that, Daniel," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "But he gave me everything. Research, treatment protocols, experimental in utero procedures. He said, if he couldn't save his son, maybe he could save ours." Clara pressed her hands over her mouth. Somewhere, in another version of the world, another Clara had buried her child. And that grief had become the reason their son would live. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device slimmer than a phone, etched with unfamiliar circuitry. "It's all here. The treatment sequence, the screening markers. We can give it to Dr. Bennett in Knoxville. He won't ask where it came from. He owes me a favor." Clara nodded, wiping her eyes. "You risked everything." He looked at her, then really looked at her. "So would you." The truth settled between them. He had crossed realities for their child. She had walked into gunfire and government interference for him. Something had changed inside her. Before July, Clara had been content to let Daniel lead, to trust quietly, to love safely. Now she understood something deeper. Love wasn't safety. Love was courage. Love was stepping forward when every instinct screamed to step back. She reached for his hand. "We don't hide anymore," she said quietly. "No more carrying things alone." Daniel nodded. "No more. Outside, Distant vehicles moved through the forest, searching. Andrew stepped inside. "They're sweeping the perimeter." But they lost the convergence signature. Without the crystal, they're blind. Clara looked at Daniel. "The crystal." Andrew held up a small pouch. "Shattered during the disruption pulse. It won't function again." Relief washed over her. No more doors opening between worlds. No more thin places. Just this one. This life. Daniel leaned his head back against the wall. Exhausted. "I saw what happens when curiosity outruns wisdom," he murmured. "Those agents, they don't understand what they're chasing." Clara studied him. "And do you?" He met her gaze. "I understand that some doors are meant to stay closed." Silence fell softly over the room. The baby shifted again, strong and steady. Daniel placed his hand over Clara's. "I felt him when I crossed." He whispered, "Like a tether. Like something pulling me home." Tears slid down her cheeks again. But this time they were different. Not grief. Gratitude. "I was pulling," she said. He smiled. Outside, the forest settled into night. Inside that old ranger station, something else settled too. Not fear, not uncertainty, but resolve. They would use the knowledge to save their son, and then they would let the rest burn. Because Clara had learned something that no journal, no convergence point, no alternate universe could teach. The greatest miracle was not crossing worlds. It was choosing, every single day, to stay and fight for the one you love. 6 months later, spring came softly to Black Hollow Ridge. The trees that had once stood witness to impossible things now bloomed in quiet indifference. Wildflowers pushed through the earth. The river ran steady and silver under the morning sun. And inside a small farmhouse 3 states away, a newborn baby cried for the first time. Clara had never heard a more beautiful sound. Daniel stood beside her hospital bed, tears running freely down his face as the nurse placed their son into her arms. He was small, red-faced, angry at the world for being so bright and loud. Alive. Completely, beautifully alive. "He's strong," the doctor said, reviewing the monitors. "Heart rhythm is perfect." Perfect. The word echoed in Clara's chest like a hymn. The in utero procedure had been delicate, experimental, quietly performed by a specialist who asked very few questions and signed even fewer documents. The data Daniel brought back had saved their child. Saved him before he ever took his first breath. Clara traced a finger over the baby's tiny hand. He gripped it instinctively, fierce and determined. "Thomas," she whispered. Daniel leaned close. "After your grandfather," he said softly. But they both knew it meant more than that. Thomas meant twin. Thomas meant the life that could have been, and the life that was. They never went back to the cabin. 2 weeks after Daniel returned, they dismantled everything. Andrew helped. Quiet, efficient. The equipment was destroyed. The notebooks burned. The hard drives wiped and crushed. The last fragments of the crystal were scattered across 3 different states, buried deep where no one would think to look. The government vehicles stopped appearing after a few months. Energy signatures without a catalyst were just noise. The stone arch returned to being what it always appeared to be. Just stone. Just earth. Just silence. Daniel accepted a teaching position at a small college in Virginia. Mathematics? Clean, predictable, honest. He never mentioned convergence points again. But sometimes, late at night, Clara would catch him standing at the nursery door, watching Thomas sleep, as if he were memorizing the rise and fall of that tiny chest. As if he still could not quite believe this version of the world was real. One evening, months after Thomas was born, Clara found Daniel in the garage. He was sanding a piece of cedar wood carefully. "You're supposed to be resting," she teased gently. He smiled. "I know." She stepped closer. On the workbench lay a half-finished mobile for Thomas's crib, carved wooden stars and small planets. balanced carefully on thin wire. At the very center hung something small, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A sliver of translucent stone. Not large enough to power anything. Not dangerous. Just enough to catch the light. "You kept a piece," she said quietly. Daniel didn't look ashamed. "I needed a reminder." "Of what?" He set the sandpaper down and turned toward her. "That I almost lost everything chasing knowledge." He walked closer, resting his hands gently on her waist. "And that the only discovery that matters is right here." She leaned her forehead against his chest. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The research, the possibility." He was quiet for a long moment. "I miss the wonder," he admitted. "The idea that there are infinite versions of us making different choices." She looked up at him. "And if there are," he smiled softly, "then somewhere out there is a version of us who didn't get this second chance." His voice thickened. "And I hope they know their pain gave meaning to ours." Clara swallowed. She sometimes dreamed of the other Clara, the woman in that faded photograph, the one who had held her baby for 3 months and said goodbye. Their lives had split on a line so thin no one could see it, and yet that invisible fracture had shaped everything. Thomas cried from inside the house. Daniel squeezed her hand. "That's our cue." They walked back inside together. Thomas lay in his crib, fists waving in protest at the injustice of an empty room. Clara lifted him, pressing her lips against his warm forehead. "You're safe," she whispered. Daniel stood beside her, one arm around her shoulders. "I crossed worlds for you," he murmured to his son. "But you brought me home." Outside, spring wind moved gently through the trees. No shimmer. No thin places. Just the ordinary miracle of a family standing together in lamplight. Clara looked at Daniel, really looked at him. Not as a man who bent reality. Not as a scientist who discovered impossible truths. But as a husband, as a father, as the man who chose love over wonder. "Some doors," she said quietly, "are better left closed." Daniel nodded. "I've seen what's on the other side." He brushed a kiss against her temple. "And everything I need is already here." Thomas gurgled softly, his tiny fingers wrapping around both their hands. And in that small room with chipped paint and second-hand furniture and a future that would be entirely ordinary, something sacred settled over them. Not magic. Not science. Not destiny. Choice. The choice to stay. The choice to protect. The choice to love fiercely, even when the universe tempts you with something extraordinary. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is come home. Not everyone is meant to open every door. Some doors test your curiosity, some test your courage, and some test your heart. Daniel once crossed worlds chasing a miracle. But in the end, he learned the greatest miracle wasn't on the other side of a thin place in the forest. It was in the quiet rhythm of his son's heartbeat, in Clara's steady hand, in the life they chose to protect. The man who once bent the fabric of reality became the father who chose to stay grounded. The woman who once lived in fear became the strength that brought her family home. Because for Clara and Daniel, the universe was never the victory. Love was. If this story moved you, subscribe for more powerful, heartfelt stories coming soon. And if you know someone who still believes in second chances, share this with them. Because sometimes, one brave decision is all it takes to change everything.